Hey everyone, this is section 8 of part 1 of Anton Pannekoek's Workers' Councils. Part 1 is titled The Task. The section that I'm reading, section 8, is titled Growth. When in the difficult fight against capital, in which the workers' councils came up and developed, victory is won by the working class. It takes up its task, the organization of production. We know, of course, that victory will not be one event, finishing the fight and introducing a then following period of reconstruction. We know that social fight and economic construction will not be separated, but will be associated as a series of successes in fight and starts of new organization, interrupted perhaps by periods of stagnation or social reaction. The workers' councils growing up as organs of fight will at the same time be organs of reconstruction. For clear understanding, however, we will distinguish these two tasks as if they were separate things, coming one after another. In order to see the true character of the transformation of society, we must treat it in a schematical way as a uniform continuous process starting, quote, the day after the victory, end quote. As soon as the workers are masters of the factories, master of society, they will set the machines running. They know that this cannot wait. To live is the first necessity, and their own life, the life of society, depends on their labor. Out of the chaos of crumbling capitalism, the first working order must be created by means of the councils. Endless difficulties will stand in their way. Resistance of all kinds must be overcome. Resistance by hostility, by misunderstanding, by ignorance. But new unsuspected forces have come into being. The forces of enthusiasm, of devotion, of insight. Hostility must be beaten down by resolute action. Misunderstanding must be taken away by patient persuading. Ignorance must be overcome by incessant propaganda and teaching. By making the connection of the shops ever stronger, by including ever wider realms of production, by making ever more precise accounts and estimates in the plannings, the regulation of the process of production continually progresses. In this way, step by step, social economy is growing into a consciously dominated organization, able to secure life necessities to all. With the realization of this program, the task of the workers' councils is not finished. On the contrary, this is only the introduction of the workers' council's real, more extensive and important work. A period of rapid development now sets in. As soon as the workers feel themselves master of their labor, free to unfold their forces, the workers' first impulse will be the determinate will to do away with all the misery and ugliness, to finish with the shortcomings and abuses, to destroy all poverty and barbarism that as inheritance of capitalism disgrace the earth. An enormous backwardness must be made up for. What the masses got lagged far behind what they might and should get under existing conditions. With the possibility of fulfilling them, their wants will be raised to higher standards. The height of culture of a people is measured by the extent and quality of its life exigencies. By simply using the available means and methods of working, quantity and quality of homes, of food, of clothing for all can be raised to a level corresponding to the existing productivity of labor. All productive force that in the former society was wasted or used for luxury of the rulers can now be used to satisfy the higher wants of the masses. Thus, first innovation of society, a general prosperity will arise. But also the backwardness in the methods of production will from the beginning have the attention of the workers. They will refuse to be harrowed and fatigued with primitive tools and obsolete working methods. If the technical methods and the machines are improved by the systematic application of all known inventions of techniques and discoveries of science, the productivity of labor can be increased considerably. This better techniques will be made accessible to all, the including in productive work of the many who before had to waste their force in the bungling of petty trade, because capitalism had no use for them, or in personal service of the propertied class, now helps to lower the necessary hours of labor for all. So this will be a time of supreme creative activity, and has to proceed from the initiative of the expert producers and the enterprises. But it can take place only by continual deliberation, by collaboration, by mutual inspiration and emulation. So the organs of collaboration, the councils, are put into unceasing action. In this new construction and organization of an ever more excellent productive apparatus, the workers' councils, as the connecting nerve strings of society, will rise to the full height of the workers' council's faculties, whereas the abundance of life necessities, the universal prosperity represents the passive side of the new life. The innovation of labor itself, as its active side, makes life a delight of glorious creative experience. The entire aspect of social life changes, also in its outer appearance, in surroundings and utensils, showing in their increasing harmony and beauty the nobleness of the work that has shaped them new. What William Morris said, speaking of the crafts of olden times with their simple tools, that the beauty of their products was due to work being a joy for man, hence it was extinguished in the ugliness of capitalism, again asserts itself, but now in the higher stage of mastery over the most perfect techniques. William Morris loved the tool of the craftsman and hated the machine of the capitalist. For the free worker of the future, the handling of the perfectly constructed machine, providing attention of acuteness, will be a source of mental exaltation, of spiritual rejoicing, of intellectual beauty. Technics makes man a free master of his own life and destiny. Technics, in a painful process of growth during many thousands of years of labor and fight, developed to the present height, put an end to all hunger and poverty, to all toiling and slavery. Technics put all the forces of nature at the service of mankind and mankind's needs. The growth of the science of nature opens to man new forms and new possibilities of life, so rich and manifold that they far surpass what we can imagine today. But technics alone cannot perform that. Only technics in the hands of a humanity that has bound itself consciously by strong ties of brotherhood into a working community controlling its own life. Together, indissolubly connected, technics as material basis and visible power, the community as ethical basis and consciousness, they determine the entire renovation of labor. And now, with his work, man himself is changing. A new feeling is taking hold of man, the feeling of security. Now at last the gnawing solicitudes for life falls off from mankind. During all the past centuries, from original savageness till during modern civilization, life was not secure. Man was not master over his subsistence. Always, also in times of prosperity, and for the wealthiest even, behind the illusion of perpetual welfare, in the subconsciousness lurked a silent solicitude for the future. As a permanent oppression, this anxiety was sunk in the hearts, weighed heavily upon the brain and hampered the unfolding of free thinking. For us, who ourselves live under this pressure, it is impossible to imagine what a deep change in outlook, in world vision, in character, the disappearance of all anxiety about life will bring about. Old delusions and superstitions that in past times had to uphold mankind in its spiritual helplessness, are now dropped. Now that man feels certain that he truly is master of his life, their place is taken by knowledge accessible to all, by the intellectual beauty of an all-encompassing scientific worldview. Even more than in labor itself, the innovation of life will appear in the preparing of future labor, in the education and training of the next generation. It is clear that, since every organization of society has its special system of education adapted to its needs, this fundamental change in the system of production must be accompanied immediately by a fundamental change in education. In the original small trade economy, in the farmer and artisan world, the family with its natural division of labor was the basic element of society, of production. Here the children grew up and learned the methods of working by gradually taking their part in the work. Afterwards, under capitalism, the family lost its economic base because afterwards under capitalism, the family lost the family's economic base because productive labor evermore was transferred to the factories. Labor became a social process with broader theoretical basis. So a broader knowledge and a more intellectual education was necessary for all. Hence schools were founded, as we know them, masses of children, educated in the isolated small homes, without any organic connection with labor, flocking into the schools to learn such abstract knowledge as is needed for society, here again without direct connection with living labor, and different, of course, according to social classes. For the children of the bourgeoisie, for the future officials and intellectuals, a good theoretical and scientific training, enabling them to direct and rule society. For the children of the farmers and the working class, an indispensable minimum. Reading, writing, computing needed for their work, completed by history and religion, to keep them obedient and respectful towards their masters and rulers. Learned writers of pedagogy textbooks, unacquainted with the capitalistic basis of these conditions, which they assume to be lasting, vainly tried to explain and to smooth out the conflicts proceeding from the separation of productive labor and education, from the contradiction between narrow family isolation and the social character of production. In the new world of collaborative production, these contradictions have disappeared, and harmony between life and labor is restored, now on the wide base of society at large. Now again, education of the youth consists in learning the working methods and their foundation by gradually taking part in the productive process. Not in family isolation, now that material provision of life necessities has been taken over by the community. Besides its function as productive, the family loses that of consumption unit. Community life, corresponding to the strongest impulses within the children themselves, will take much larger place. Out of the small homes they enter into the wide air of society. The hybridical combination of home and school gives way to communities of children, for a large part regulating their own life under careful guidance of adult educators. Education, instead of passively imbibing teachings from above, is chiefly personal activity, directed towards and connected with social labor. Now the social feelings, as an inheritance of primeval times, living in all, but extremely strong in children, can develop without being suppressed by the need of egotism of the capitalist struggle for life. Whereas the forms of education are determined by community and self-activity, its contents are given by the character of the production system towards which it prepares. This production system was ever more, especially in the last century, based upon the application of science to techniques. Science gave man mastery over the forces of nature. This mastery over nature has made possible the social revolution and affords the basis of the new society. The producers can be masters of their labor, of production, only if producers master these sciences. Hence the growing generation must be instructed in the first place in the science of nature and nature's application. No longer, as under capitalism, will science be a monopoly of a small minority of intellectuals, and the uninstructed masses be restricted to subordinate activities. Science in science's full extent will be open to all, instead of the division between one-sided manual and one-sided mental work as specialties of two classes. Now comes the harmonious combination of manual and mental work for everybody. This will be necessary also for the further development of the productivity of labor, depending as it does on the further progress of its foundations, science, and techniques. Now it is not merely a minority of trained intellectuals, but it is all the good brains of the entire people, all prepared by the most careful education, that occupy themselves with the creation of knowledge and knowledge's application in labor. Then may be expected a tempo of progress in the development of science and techniques, compared to which the much praised progress under capitalism is only a poor commencement. Under capitalism, there is a distinctive difference between the tasks of the young and of the adults. Youth has to learn. The adults have to work. It is clear that as long as labor is toiling and exploitative service, for a purpose in opposition to the well-being and comfort of the workers, to produce the highest profit for capital, every capacity once acquired must be used up to the limits of time and force. No time of a worker could be wasted for learning ever new things. Only an exceptional adult had the possibility, and still less had the duty regularly to instruct himself during his further life. In the new society, this difference disappears. Now in youth, the learning consists in taking part, in increasing rate with the years, in the productive work. And now with the increase of productivity and the absence of exploitation, ever more leisure is available to the adults for spiritual activities. It enables adults to keep apace with the rapid development of the methods of work. This indeed is necessary for them. To take part in the discussions and decisions is only possible if they can study the problems of techniques that continually incite and stimulate their attention. The grand development of society through the unfolding of techniques and science, of security and abundance, of power over nature and life, can only be ascertained by the growth of capability and knowledge of all the partners. It gives new contents of thrilling activity to their life. It elevates existence and makes it a conscious delight of eager participation in the spiritual and practical progress of the new world. Added to these sciences of nature are now the new sciences of society that were lacking under capitalism. The specific feature of the new system of production is that man now dominates the social forces which determine his ideas and impulses. Practical domination must find its expression in theoretical domination, in knowledge of the phenomena and the determining forces of human life and action, of thinking and feeling. In former times, when through ignorance about society, their social origin was unknown, their power was ascribed to the supernatural character of spirit, to a mysterious power of the mind, and the disciplines dealing with them were labeled spiritual sciences, psychology, philosophy, ethics, history, sociology, aesthetics. As with all science, their beginnings were full of primitive mysticism and tradition. But contrary to the sciences of nature, their rise to real scientific height was obstructed by capitalism. They could not find a solid footing because under capitalism, they proceeded from the isolated human being with its individual mind, because in those times of individualism, it was not known that man is essentially a social being, that all man's faculties emanate from society and are determined by society. Now, however, the society lies open to the view of man as an organism of mutually connected human beings, and that the human mind is understood as their main organ of interconnection, now they can develop into real sciences. And the principal importance of these sciences for the new community is no less than that of the sciences of nature. They deal with the forces lying in man, determining man's relations to his fellow men and to the world, instigating his actions in social life, appearing in the events of history, past and present. As mighty passions and blind impulses, they worked in the great social fights of mankind, now elating man to powerful deeds, then by equally blind traditions keeping him in apathetic submissivity. Always spontaneous, ungoverned, unknown. The new science of man and society discloses these forces and so enables man to control these forces by conscious knowledge. From masters driving him through passive instincts, they become servants, ruled by self-restraint, directed by him towards his well-conceived purposes. The instruction of the growing generation in the knowledge of these social and spiritual forces, and its training and consciously directing them will be one of the chief educational tasks of the new society. Thus the young will be enabled to develop all endowments of passion and willpower, of intelligence and enthusiasm, and to apply them in efficient activity. It is an education of character as well as of knowledge. This careful education of the new generation, theoretical and practical, in natural science and in social consciousness, will form a most essential element in the new system of production. Only in this way an unhampered progression of social life will be secured. And in this way, too, the system of production will develop to ever higher forms. Thus, by theoretical mastery of the sciences of nature and society, and by their practical application in labor and life, the workers will make the earth into a happy abode of free mankind. Okay, so that's the end of section 8 of the part 1 of Anton Pannekoek's Workers' Councils. The section that I just read was section 8, and it's titled Growth. It was titled Growth. The next section is titled Trade Unionism, and it's the first section of part 2 of Anton Pannekoek's Workers' Councils, and is titled The Fight. Thank you so much for listening.